Welcome back to Brutally Honest Jazz Advice Part 2. In the words of Fabrizio Romano, here we go. 26. Practice deliberately. Very easy to pick up the guitar to practice and put it down at the end of the session and feel like you might have been playing for an hour but you haven't really achieved anything. This is often because you might not have a routine or simply you don't know what you are trying to achieve. I personally strive to try to be very deliberate with my practice. I want to know how I'm going to use that time and for what end. So it's not just about doing an activity, it's doing in a manner that targets our weaknesses and being structured. And how might this look for you? Well, firstly, have defined goals. Practicing guitar for 2 hours is very different to deliberately practicing for 2 hours. Defined goals can cover all aspects of musicianship and is too big a topic for this video, but I break my practice down into 20-minute chunks and each covering different aspects of things that I need to work on, and this helps me stay focused. I think sometimes it's easier not to approach practice like this because we have to confront our weaknesses. Sometimes we're not self-aware of what they might be, and it's easier and sometimes more preferable to avoid that, and sadly it's at the cost of our improvement. 27. Learning a jazz standard is a lifelong endeavour, and that's a good thing. Now, learning a jazz standard isn't like learning a piece of music that is to be replicated in the same way. For example, a guitarist learns to play Van Halen's solo on Beat It. That's an end in itself, whereas a jazz guitar player working on a standard, for them it should be a working document, and your playing of that song should be a lifelong thing and develop over time. Because over time you get a better ear for all aspects of that song. The changes, the melody, and how you play it overall evolves. As your deeper connection with that song builds over time, the song reveals more creative possibilities to you. We've got this wonderful bank of repertoire to practice and play over the rest of the course of our lives, and we can keep playing these wonderful songs and learning how to play with them and be more creative with them over that time. 28. Don't overplay. The space you leave is as important as the notes you play. Now, when trying to help others with improvising, one of the most common things I would say is you should probably play less. And that's not me being critical of their playing in the sense of, oh, you need to put the guitar down. Of course not. Overplaying is what I'm talking about. And that is often a mindless stream of notes akin to a stream of consciousness. And this is a problem for the following reasons. If you just keep playing note after note, you have to keep coming up with new ideas all of the time. You miss out, therefore, on the opportunity to harness things like call and response and repetition, which are key ingredients for a good solo in my book. Anyone listening to it, they have zero time to reflect on your ideas because it's just a barrage of notes. We also miss out the opportunity to harness contrast, which is a key ingredient for a good solo. And sometimes what I'd do is I'd phrase on the A sections, plenty of space between phrases. And then on the B section, I'd take that space away and fill it. And then on the final way, if it's an AABA, I'd go back to that phrased way of playing. That for me is an effective use of space. But I think the worst thing about playing like just note after note, I think often is the fact when people do that, they're often playing without intention and they're just chucking out loads of ideas and notes in the hope that something works. And to use space well is hard though, as it means you really do need good rhythmic control and an ability to start and finish your ideas at different points within the bar. You might already be aware that you do this, you might not do it. But I'd just say, record yourself soloing and just listen to how you play and think about how you're currently using space. Is there much space at all? Maybe next time you take a solo, don't just jump in and start beat 1, bar 1. Maybe hold off for a few bars. And as ever, if this is a problem in your playing, take inspiration from recordings and see how the greats utilize space, because it is as important as the notes you play, and it is it should be one of the easiest things to do, but it's, like I said, it involves having a good, strong command of rhythm. Oh, and plus a good awareness of where you are within the chord structure and form. 29, licks aren't a sustainable way to improvise. One way you can work on learning to solo is through learning licks and then using them to solo with. Whilst this gives you something to say, for me it comes with the following issues. Firstly, you need to know a ton of licks to get through a solo, and it would sound like licks strung together. Imagine having to play a whole set. It means it's just not a sustainable way to approach doing things, and if you have a bad memory like me, it would be just incredibly frustrating. Now, I tried it early on in my jazz guitar journey, and I could put together enough stuff for a chorus, but I'd run dry if I had to do multiple choruses, and I realised this isn't the right way to approach doing things, and I really think it's not in the spirit of the genre. Whilst improvising calls upon a lot of known aspects of music, your solo should be a moment in time. Sure, licks might come out in the moment, just deep from our unconscious, but not in the sense that you're just a lick player stringing things together. I also think licks are maybe more something that's common to blues and rock, and in jazz it's more common to frame them slightly differently, which brings me to 30. there's a difference between licks and jazz vocabulary. The commonly held view is that jazz is a language and that each era and subgenre has language specific to it. When I think of a lick, I think of something very specific, maybe quite short, maybe idiomatic of a certain player, like a line that sounds like Charlie Christian, octave line that sounds like Wes. Whereas jazz vocabulary is, to me, a broader thing. Rather than specific ideas, it's about a whole musical language which could encompass licks, ideas for phrasing, rhythmic vocabulary, use of chromaticism, arpeggios and scales and so forth. And accents, stuff like that. Over time, we each build up our own jazz vocabulary. Now this is done hopefully through listening, practice, transcribing, playing with others, and hopefully those things combine for us to be able to then express ourselves fluently with that language we've developed and evolved over time. Whilst a lick is something to be memorised, I think of vocabulary as our own kind of individual language to express ourselves. And the thing that really helps with that is understanding how the language works. That's where you're able to look at a melody, you're able to look at ideas in solos and recognise what's going on harmonically. 31. Improvising equals playing in the moment and focusing on phrases, not notes. The definition of improvising is to create and perform music, drama or verse spontaneously or without preparation. Now I think that's a bit of a stretch when it comes to jazz, as a good improvised solo will be harnessing a hell of a lot of preparation in the practice room. For example, it will harness, jazz vocabulary, rhythmic vocabulary, a musician's technique, musical tools such as scales and arpeggios, and much, much more. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? A good soloist won't be thinking about those things as they're creating an improvised solo. It should be an in-the-moment thing. But it's calling upon a lot of previously practiced things that are coming together in an improvised sense. Now, when I'm truly improvising, because occasionally on a gig I just don't get into the right mindset, when I'm properly into it, I'm not thinking about any of that. Often not thinking about anything, I'm just playing. But unconsciously I'm tapping into lots of things I've already practiced, things I've heard, and so forth. I'm not playing some sort of free-form jazz exploration. If anything, I just think about phrasing, not what notes I play, but how I structure a solo maybe. That's about as deep as my thoughts go, unless I don't know the song. If I don't know the song very well, if I don't know the changes, if I'm not confident of it, then I might think a little bit more than I should. But that's just down to the fact that I don't know the song quite yet well enough, which goes back to the whole lifelong journey with a standard, getting to know it better. Either way, a lot has to be in place to be able to improvise in the truest sense, and most importantly, you have to internalise the chord changes, the sound of them. And once that takes place, it's much easier to then create lines over chord changes. 32. Take risks. Improvising should involve taking risks of some sort and trying things out, experimenting. Sometimes they might not work out, but there's a chance to surprise ourselves and our listeners by taking risks. And again, I think this is in line with playing in the spirit of the genre and expressing ourselves. Sometimes things might not work out, but you play something with a strong rhythm and you can make almost any interval work. You hear something, you feel something, you play it. It might not necessarily work out, or it might lead you somewhere really interesting that you'd never have gone down. 33. Be a good listener. I would divide my listening of jazz up into two categories, passive or active. If I was cooking in the kitchen, I've got Oscar Peterson in the background. It's probably more on the passive side, just something to enjoy whilst I follow some recipe. But when I'm just listening, I am listening for, the way someone phrases, the timing, the chord changes. Oh, if I don't know the song, what chord might that be? What idea might I hear next? Where is chord 1? And so on. There's so much we can listen for. And that active, detailed listening is key, as it gives us inspiration and possibly answers some of the questions we might have about playing jazz. And to listen more actively, things you can do could be picking out maybe what instruments you can hear on the recording, maybe picking out when you hear chords change, which is often on beats 1 and 3. As I said earlier, where chord 1 is. Often a song will start in it, but sometimes not. So, when you listen to a song for the first time, that's usually the first thing I'm thinking, where's chord 1? What form the song is in. Could you hear that the song's in AAB form? Or whether you can hear things like 2-5-1s. It's maybe something to think about, and I always try to focus on listening as much, and probably more than the time I actually spend practicing. 34. Go beyond just playing notes. When you play melodies or solo, try to go beyond just simply playing the notes. There's a lot of nuance you can put into one note, and a ton of contrast you can put into one phrase, such as, varying the dynamics, not having notes all the same volume, getting gradually louder or gradually quieter, Techniques such as slides, vibrato, pull-offs, hammer-ons, dare I say it, bends. Accenting, legato, nice smooth work notes, or staccato, nice short and snappy notes. Just watch someone like Julian Large. The minute detail going into each note is insane. And it's something that I think is easy to forget, and we just end up just going through the motions playing notes. And maybe, playing simpler things, but thinking more about how we play those notes and experimenting could yield more satisfying and more kind of interesting playing for anyone listening to it. I'd much rather listen to an expressive person soloing than someone that's just full of technique and can solo in 16th notes for multiple choruses. 35, know how to count in a tune. Now, this is basic, but there's certain ways to count in that help yourself when you're practicing, and if you're playing with others, can massively help them feel swing. So this doesn't apply for every kind of tune, but think, a classic medium swing tune kind of tempo. Counting 1, 2, 3, 4 just doesn't cut it, which is why jazz backing tracks or concerts you will hear a longer count in. So the way to do it is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that helps establish tempo and the swing feel. So important to get the tune off or your practice off in the right way. You'll feel the beat and the swing more readily. 36, keep your instrument in good working order. Now, sometimes a guitar can feel difficult to play, or things like intonation can go out. In both cases, we are left with something that might make our practice harder or our bond with that instrument to suffer. Something I try and do with all of my guitars is a regular setup and then keeping the guitar in its case when it's not being played. I have a couple guitars on a rack, usually just for quick access, so I don't do it with all of my guitars, but the guitars that I use on stage are always in their cases unless I'm playing them, and this makes a massive difference in the longevity of the setup. And maintaining your instrument, if you play with others, it's key. Sometimes we have a crackly pot, or sometimes fret buzz, or maybe your amp's got an issue. Keeping on top of these things is important, as otherwise it can negatively impact practice or performance, and any of those kind of barriers to impede our playing that we could avoid, we should be addressing. 37, be honest with yourself. A hard thing is sometimes being honest with ourselves, and I mean that about the following things. How much we can maybe achieve on the instrument based on how much time we can afford to practice. Being honest with ourselves about our weaknesses, because if we can't be frank with ourselves about this, then we simply won't improve, because self-awareness comes through honest assessment of our playing, and that should then inform what we practice. Yes, it can be frustrating, can be annoying, can be depressing, thinking I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. But I see those insights as pathways to improve and ways to think about what should be on your practice routine. You can only do that through being honest with yourself, and I think sometimes guitar players in this day and age, they look for the next answer in the next video, when sometimes just a bit more self-awareness about themselves and their playing would be all they need to help them improve. 38. Don't outstay your welcome when soloing. I remember being at a jam session and a fellow guitar player took 9 or 10 choruses. Now, when he started his first chorus, there were about 10 people jamming. By his 10th chorus, there was just him and one other musician. And it was a case of him not reading the room and not having that self-awareness, because everyone else was just pretty much packed up and gone to the bar, because they were fed up of listening to this guy soloing without thinking of anyone else. Now, every band or jam session will usually have an etiquette. Taking multiple choruses can definitely be a thing, especially when someone's in the groove, but often at jam sessions, any more than one and other people will be annoyed, or the song's just going to last all night. If you're at a jam, maybe sit and observe at first, work out how they like to do things and just stick to that. As for playing in a band, you could agree how many choruses to take, or just take it as it comes. And why do people do this? I think partly it's because of what people hear on recordings. Sure, it's great to hear someone like Wes Montgomery spread out over multiple choruses, but most of us aren't Wes. Personally, I prefer to do 1 to 2 choruses at a gig, depending on the length of the form. Now, some subgenres of jazz, it might be more common to have a more extended solo. 39, sign off your solos. Something you will notice at a gig is how pros sign off their solos. There's typically a very clear ending, not something that fizzles out or spills into the next chorus without any cue for the rest of the band to know that it's the end of their solo. And if that happens, there's confusion amongst the other members of the band, and personally I think it's pretty rude to the next soloist. So to do this, it's obviously about playing with intention and playing something that has a definitive end. As a guitarist, you might want to wrap things up a couple bars before the end so that you can get back into comping and not lose time or upset anyone. But you often find, say, in a classic 32 bar AABA standard, in bar 30 it resolves to chord 1, say. That would make a natural place to finish your solo rather than in bar 32. 40. Play the form. The song's form can help you structure your solo. If you have an AABA song, then your playing should reflect that. I treat sections differently so that a solo tells more of a story and has a structure to it. That way it's not just the same kind of playing all the way through. 41. Play through your mistakes. Making mistakes is part of playing jazz or playing any musical instrument for that matter. And if you're improvising in the truest sense, then sometimes you're going to hit something you don't intend to, or simply going to miss a note of the melody and so on. At that moment in time, you have the following options. You could stop and work out what went wrong. You could keep going and ignore it. You could embrace that mistake and make something out of it. Either way, it can really knock our self-confidence, and it's why I play expecting to make mistakes at some point in the course of a gig. I'm going to forget something. I'm going to play a note that doesn't work, and that's okay. What's important is it's happening in real time, so I have to react quickly and just keep playing. I can't fix it, but I can make sure it doesn't derail the song, and I just have to let it go mentally. Otherwise I might lose my head and forget or make more mistakes after that. So in your practice, I would try and play through mistakes and react to them positively. Say you were practicing the melody of a standard to a backing track and you fluff a phrase. Either just try and get the next phrase or play something else until you find where you are. Either way, you'll find people that have been playing for a long time have a very relaxed attitude to how they react to mistakes. They just brush it off, and it's something to learn to try to do. Just don't stop and have a meeting about it. It's just carry on. Obviously, if you're making a consistent mistake, that might be something then you think, that's something I need to look at in my practice. 42. If a guitar is too good to be true, then sadly it probably is. Sometimes you're searching for a guitar and one comes up. The price is great, the condition's amazing. Now in my experience, these kind of adverts are often too good to be true. They're either a scam, a fake guitar, or the instrument will simply have issues. Faced with such a thing, I always take a step back, come back to it later, look at it with fresh eyes, or even better, sleep on it. I bet you will spot something that you miss when you look at it again with fresh eyes, and you'll be thankful to have dodged a bullet. A couple of years ago, I remember wanting to buy an early Gibson amp, and I'd emailed this shop, and they had one for sale on Reverb, and they were really quick to say to me, "We will personally deliver this to your door." And I was instantly like, this is weird, and I was quite suspicious, as they didn't even know where I lived. For all they knew, I could be on a remote Scottish island. I then Googled the guy's name, and lots of newspaper articles came up about fraud and counterfeit instruments. Needless to say, I didn't email them back, and I was very glad I did my due diligence and didn't let that sort of spur of the moment, I want that, grab me. Next time you're in that same situation, take a step back, go make a tea, cup of coffee, come back to it, really look at it with fresh eyes and think, is this legit? 43. Private sales are the best way to sell and buy guitars in monetary terms. What is your favourite way to buy a guitar? Personally, I really like a shop which is appointment only. They make you good coffee and leave you to it for several hours. But obviously with a shop purchase comes a premium and also some protection. You can take it back if you don't like it. Or depending on the shop, if you're buying a vintage instrument, you can get confidence in the authenticity of the instrument. But if you're speaking value for money, the best way to go is private sale, and ideally from a player rather than a collector. My least favourite people to sell or buy from are collectors. I much prefer dealing with people that really play. That will mean they care more about the instrument, it will have been played, it will have been well maintained and set up, rather than some stiff instrument that's been sat in a cupboard for years. Whilst selling privately or buying privately is the best bang for your buck if you like, you do have to meet some oddballs sometimes. If I sell on Facebook Marketplace, I do some stalking to check they're a real person. Ideally, I like to see a mutual musical friend, and instantly I'm more likely to message them back. As for selling, the private sale takes a lot of patience sometimes, and you can just part exchange it in a shop for less hassle, but it obviously does mean you lose out a bit financially. And I've never had much luck with commission sales. They often just sit there. So when selling, I do prefer to use Reverb or Facebook Marketplace. But Reverb I prefer overall, as I feel the buyers are more serious on the whole. And what's your experiences of buying and selling guitars? I can tell you my worst experience. I had a 330 listed for sale on eBay without a reserve. I then fell quite ill and forgot about it. The guitar then went for, I think, £1,400, so £600-800 less than I was willing to sell it for. Now, giving that guitar over was a wretched experience and one that I will never let happen again. And to add insult to injury, is that the right way around? I think so. The guy who I sold it to accidentally texted me after, thinking he was texting his other half, say what an amazing deal he'd got. I really learnt my lesson that day. 44, don't write off a guitar. I've been guilty of this before. I get a guitar and don't bond with it, and I haven't moved beyond the strings it came with. I then move it on quickly and think, oh, it's just not for me. And looking back, I can think of guitars that I wish I'd persevered with. Maybe a change of string type to a heavier gauge, or maybe a lighter gauge, or a different type of string. Because those changes can make all the difference. Or if you get the guitar in the right hands of a good luthier or guitar tech, they can make a guitar feel great for you. So next time you've got a guitar in that situation, it's certainly worth exploring those things before flipping it straight away. 45, arpeggios and scales are tools to create with. Arpeggios and scales are key for the following reasons. They help us learn our instrument and how to express key harmonic structures, and they help us develop our ear. But they are simply tools, and the tricky thing is you have to know them really, really well to fluently solo with them. This takes a long time and it can be a frustrating process, but you have to stick with it. Really good players have often practiced these things so much they don't have to think about them, and that's often the main difference. They will be utilising their scale and arpeggio knowledge unconsciously in their solos, and if they're a really established player, they won't have to think about it. So as a result, when they try and teach people, they find it difficult to express what it is someone needs to learn. And arpeggio and scale practice is still part of my daily practice routine. 46, tension and release is a key ingredient to any solo. When we get so absorbed in what notes to play, what arpeggios or what scales and so forth, it's easy to miss out some of the key ingredients of the music. And that crucial one for me is tension and release, or the idea of playing inside versus outside. If a solo doesn't have any tension or outside elements, then it's all going to sound very safe and potentially bland. Learning to use things like chromatics or chord substitutions can help us step away from playing inside too much. And just remember that dominant chords are naturally the best place to try and do this first. And you can bring tension into your playing by emphasizing a dissonant note or repeating the same note against multiple chords. I love doing that. But it's essentially about setting the listener up for some kind of release. And sometimes that's quite delayed, that might be several bars ahead. But keeping that tension going helps keep the listener engaged. But the paradox here is you have to learn to play inside before you can play outside. 47, your first transcription will likely be wrong. I look back at early transcriptions that I did and think I probably did reasonably well with the pitch, but dreadfully with the rhythm. And people often shy away from transcription because it's hard. But like anything, it gets easier if you do it more, and it's about picking the right kind of solos or ideas to transcribe first. Getting it wrong is part of how we learn. It can be frustrating, but it's those points where we are actually learning. We're either gaining maybe a harmonic insight, or maybe we are learning about things in our playing that we need to work on. And a couple of things I'd add to that. Players tend to get better on with transcribing jazz solos or melodies if they are used to already working things out on the guitar. For example, if you haven't worked out a simple familiar melody or a riff, then that's the place to start. Work on easy stuff before trying jazz tunes or solos. Having an appreciation of intervals, how to find them, recognizing the sound of them is a solid foundation for this kind of work also. It's also easier to work out a solo or a melody if you know the chords, because quite often melodies will be based around chord tones. And a great test of whether you're ready for this, can you take, say, something incredibly simple that we all know, the melody to Happy Birthday, pick a note on the guitar, can you play it? It should be easy. But if you've never done that kind of thing by it before, then you might find it tricky to begin with. So you have to start where you are with this and do what you need right now. In this day and age, it's easier to get transcriptions of solos. But then, by jumping that step ahead, you're missing out on all that potential learning. And quite possibly you end up learning something and not understanding it, which is arguably not a worthwhile thing to be doing. 48, don't worry about memorizing solos. Now, is the point of transcription to be able to play said solo from memory? Whilst it certainly wouldn't hurt, for me it's not really why I transcribe solos. I do it for the following reasons. To learn phrasing techniques, to pick up rhythmic vocabulary, to gain insight into how a certain player plays over certain changes or chord types, and that then gives me inspiration for how I could do it. How they structure their ideas, so how they play the form, how the solo starts, develops and finishes. All of those insights inform my own playing, and sometimes it's hard to see the direct rub off of that kind of stuff, as it's often probably an unconscious thing. I've transcribed tons of solos, but I can play very few all the way through. My memory just isn't cut out for it. I'd have to practice it a lot and regularly to get it down to the point where I'm not going to forget it. And I'm not sure that's a good use of time. But those little points of learning I've mentioned are incredibly powerful. I've always felt the answers to our problems are on the recordings, and transcription is the bridge to gain those answers. 49, you have to know how your phrases fit rhythmically. A really hard thing to learn when working on soloing is learning how long your ideas take, so how much space they fill up rhythmically. And the skills behind this are, feeling where your idea starts, e.g. does it start on beat 1, on the and of 4, on the and of 1, and then how long does it last? If you can't feel that kind of thing, there might be a disconnect between your solos and the chords and the form, and you might simply lose your place. One thing I did to address this is just work on a phrase. Try working on, where it starts, focus on how much space it takes up, and then try it against a backing track. But just, play ideas with an awareness of how much space it's taking up. 50. Bar lines can be restrictive. Now, I think this happens without people realising it, and it's being restricted by bar lines in that they inform how you play too much. We learn X song and it's a bar of this chord to that chord and so on. We are breaking things down into small chunks, which is, very helpful for learning initially, but it can cause us to think so rigidly about a tune, especially when it comes to soloing. If you think like this, you might find that your phrases are really short. A phrase on this chord, a phrase on that chord, a phrase on that chord. Now, I don't think of D minor 7, G7 to C major 7 as 3 bars. I would feel that as one movement, a journey to that C chord. And that's something over time you want to try to do with standards. Try to feel harmony in larger chunks. This way you're thinking or feeling things less bar to bar. And this in turn opens the door to be able to play and create longer phrases. And finally, remember, when you play an idea, you got the bar line. Doesn't mean you have to start straight after it. You can start on beat 1, but you could start before the bar line or after the bar line. And that's another aspect of trying to free ourselves up from the bar lines. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Leave any comments below if you've experienced or are currently working through any of these. Now, please see below for a link to my Patreon page. On the screen is the first video in this series. There will be 2 further episodes. Don't forget, jazz guitar lessons here every Monday. Until next time, you take care.